Let's bring in Candace Laing. She's the president and the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. She is in Saskatoon today. Candace, thanks for your time. What do you think we're going to see?
Well, I think as the press secretary indicated, the Trump administration is still spending time perfecting what is the approach, and I think that means they are still very much in flux. And if everybody is confused, what is happening or what are even the tariffs we're looking at, it's absolutely understandable. So we've come through a time of having tariffs applied to Canada on trade and non-trade issues, and now what we are expecting though is the hope to get some clarity on what is the approach to the sweeping tariffs, which are really intended to address specific trade irritants that have been outlined in a foreign trade barriers report.
Yeah, and I mean, there is, and I mentioned this before, definitely a lot of mixed messaging going on. Trump saying that Canada treats us very badly, talking about how the European Union was created to screw the United States of America, his word. Then he has a call with Prime Minister Mark Carney, and it seems like, they're getting along, and there's, room to negotiate here. Then the president saying we're going to hit countries around the world, pay them back, and then he sort of walks that back and says we're going to be nicer than they are to us. So it's really hard to figure out what might happen. But you talked about some of these sectoral tariffs as a possibility, maybe lumber, agriculture, different areas that may be affected in the Canadian economy. We know cars as well, possibly tomorrow. What do you think we might see on that? Because the president has said numerous times, Candace, as you know, we don't need Canada to make our cars, we don't need Canadian lumber, we don't need Canadian steel, and on it goes.
Yeah, well, first, I think it's really important to recognize that the full comprehension, appreciation, understanding of the integration of our supply chains and economy is not being taken into account. And I think we'll have to feel the pain for that to be fully realized, unfortunately. But when you look at, what is outlined in this foreign trade barriers report, there's 400 pages in total outlining irritants for many, many countries. There are 5 pages for Canada specifically, and they do outline things that are, well known to us because we've been negotiating these in our trade agreement in CUSMA or USMCA. The good news is that these irritants don't, feed that rhetoric or untruth that we have a broad and balanced trade relationships. They do, however, outline specific issues that are, like our digital services tax or our supply managed sectors. They're very specific about that. What we don't know is if today the U.S. administration will announce just a broad tariff on countries that they have these issues with, or they'll be more targeted. And that might come down to the capacity they may or may not have to actually implement it, a targeted versus more broad approach.
Right, absolutely. And you talked about some of the areas, supply management. Dairy is one of the issues that the White House has raised numerous times about, 300% tariff on American butter coming into Canada. They also have talked about the GST. They've talked about the French language laws in Quebec, which limit English as being a trade barrier as well. So is there a possible off-ramp? What might that look like for us?
Well, I think, when Canada looks at those issues, and they have been, they're not unknown to us because they've been raised with the tools that are there to find resolution to these, through our trade agreement. And so I think what's important, and we've heard from the Canadian government, is that, concessions, and this is where we might get stuck because the Trump administration insists on using tariffs as the tool. And I think the response in Canada will be concessions will not be granted until we have proper negotiation around these issues.
Candace, thanks for taking some time for us today. We'll see how this plays out in about 4 hours from now. Much appreciated.